Mafinezam with the West Asia Council. It's really great to have you here. We've known each other for a long time. I've always admired your work and what you're doing and your organization. I really wanted to kind of get you here and talk about not only the West Asia Council, but as an Iranian-Canadian and someone that has some exposure to the mindset in Washington, D.C. and foreign policy issues. I wanted to get into the the Iranian issue that's on everybody's mind and get your thoughts, feelings about the future, what's going on today, and how can we have a constructive conversation. But before we get into that stuff, tell me about yourself. How did you get into this role, and what is the West Asia Council all about?
Thank you, Shahriar. So my name is Alidad Mafinezam, and I'm with this US-based public charity, the West Asia Council, even though I have been living in Toronto, Canada, Toronto area for the past 5 years, and this is where I grew up, is Canada. And although I have had the pleasure of living in the US for many years for my graduate school, I finished high school there anyway, long story there. But my perspective is really a North American one, even though I'm based in Canada. And the West Asia Council is focused on diaspora empowerment, not just for the Iranian community in North America, but other communities that are underserved, underrepresented in the halls of decision making. And that includes Turkish, Arabic speaking. It includes East Asian communities, be it Chinese, Korean, what have you. We've had events with all of these communities over the years. But of course, my greatest passion is for the Iranian diaspora, because that's who I am and that's who you are, and great work you've done in this arena. And so the bottom line for me is this tremendous energy and capacity of this community in North America. How could it be better harnessed? And what are some of the obstacles, some of the challenges that have hindered our progress towards that kind of capacity to affect positive change locally and globally? And that's part of what I'm hoping to discuss with you today, is what can we all accomplish together?
Right. No, I appreciate it. And I think you cannot have enough organizations like yourself to shepherd constructive conversations, because politics is a very passionate business, but governing and administration is a lot tougher because it comes in the aftermath. But it comes with the empowerment that you're talking about that is really important. So looking at that part of the world and being a participant observer of empowerment in different countries, I guess I want to get your gut reaction to what do you think is happening in Iran? What are you observing from where you're sitting at?
I think it's a sea change. I think, rest in peace, Masa Amini and the dozen or so other women or more who have been killed on the streets of that country protesting for their basic human rights, have brought about a sea change in the society and in time the politics of that country. I don't think you can go back. I don't believe in a month's time we'll say, oh, there was another movement, because it's now global. It's global, and women's fear has been shed, and that they are the vanguard of this movement, because under the theocracy for 43 years, the oppressive forced veiling of women has been the way the so-called, I always call it so-called Islamic regime, because I don't think this is real Islam, has used that as a way of controlling the population. Right. And this is in a country that, unlike some of our neighbors in that region, has a history of women's empowerment. You know, we had women ministers under the Shah. Even after the revolution, women have voted, even though their rights have been curtailed in the post-revolutionary period, but they have voted. They have been involved in the public arena. They outnumber men and have for over 2 decades in the universities across the country in terms of enrollment. And so they are a major force. And this time around, you see that after these really tragic deaths and the brutalization of these women and men, boys and girls, children, by the country's militias, you know, entrusted with oppressing the population, you see the so-called morality police no longer patrolling. You see many, many videos and photos of women unveiled walking on the street.
Mm.
So that fear is gone. And if it comes down to a big fight, it could be extremely costly for the country. If it comes down to a violent insurrection, it could be very costly. And we'll get into that in a moment. How could change come about in a way that isn't that costly? And what are some of the scenarios that we're looking at? But I believe this is not something you can go back on. That genie is out of the bottle. I can't imagine the morality police going back to their former selves and former ways of operating moving forward. I think we've begun a new chapter there. The question is, where will this new chapter lead? That's the real question.
Right. You said so much important stuff. I think being an Iranian American and married to an Iranian woman, you should never tell an Iranian woman what not to do. I think I think Iranian women have been such a powerful force in our culture historically. Such an incredible contribution to science and math, and we have so many award-winning Iranian women all over the world now in politics, and it just boggles the mind. Why would a country want to cut out of contribution to society half of its better half? It's just crazy. And especially when you look at other Islamic countries where they have celebrated and, of course, allow their women population to thrive in all aspects of life. Why is the Iranian brand so limited and so constrictive? And the rest of the country, West Asia included, where there are religious minorities, why is it so that we just haven't learned to unleash?
Well, in a word, Shariar, because our country has acted in a reactionary way.
Right.
Why reactionary? Because Reza Shah, who was Iran's king from 1925 to 1941, and prior to that, since 1920, the most important political figure in the country. So for 20 years, he became the most important political personality in 20th century Iran. He forcibly deveiled women. Right. And that was wrong. You don't do that. Just like you don't forcibly veil women.
Right.
And so the revolution of 1979, right from the get-go, was reactionary. Instead of focusing what it wants to achieve, it was more focused on what it hates, what it's against. So we're against the veneer of westernization, which is unveiled women, right? As opposed to, we are in favor of women's empowerment, right? We're against America, again, reactionary. Why? Because in the quarter century prior to the revolution, the CIA was, for all intents and purposes, running much of the country. The Shah's ministers, the military, the intelligence apparatus was all set up by CIA, MI6, so on and so forth, right? So it was reactionary, as opposed to, so we hate America, death to America after the revolution, right? As opposed to, how can I construct a good, healthy, sustainable relationship with the United States? That wasn't the question. It wasn't what I'm for, it's what I'm against. Reactionary. And that's one of the pitfalls we want to avoid this time around.
Right.
Because people are so fed up with the clergy and the thugs that they unleash on their own people that they just want to get rid of them.
Right.
Even if it comes down to razing to the ground all religious symbols, mosques, this concept of Imamzadeh, of which we have thousands in the country, right? Which is descendants of the imams and the prophet, right? So the challenge, in a word, is to be actionary, not reactionary.
Right.
Because that's, again, I'm seeing traces of that both within the country, not just traces, but significant manifestations of that within the country and among the diaspora.
Right.
It's reactionary, right? Let's just tear it down and let's not worry about what we're going to put in its place.
Right. Well,
we're
very good at that, aren't we? We're very good at reactionary. And just that exact point you just mentioned, I hear from a lot of different activists, influencers, commentators, that anything is better than what we have now.
No, that's not true. I disagree with
Yeah,
that.
I know,
I think
but
it
I'm just
could
saying
get
that's
worse.
yeah, that's what I'm hearing. But you're right.
Right.
I don't agree with it either. That's not responsible public policy.
Yeah.
But let me ask you this. I mean,
Uh,
now that we're talking about change, what
uh,
does success look like? What over the next few months? What is it? A no hijab law? Is it regime change? Is it a new constitution? What does it look like?
Success looks like two things. One, get rid of forced veiling and abolish the morality police. That's
Okay.
the first thing. The second thing is create or empower organizations and groups of Iranians so it doesn't come down to a person, another Ubermensch, another Superman, right? Or even
Right.
Superwoman. Hmm?
Right.
We need an organization or a group of organizations whose members really trust and believe in one another. And inside the country, that's not doable,
Yeah.
right? Because 5 people get together, have a session, they're all going to be hauled in,
Right.
right?
Right.
Abroad, however, we could do that. And there are two countries that are top of mind,
Mm.
the US and Canada, because it's in these two countries. And I've done extensive work with both communities on both sides of that border, 49th parallel, right?
Mm.
So I have some familiarity with what goes on and who the major players and
Mm.
organizations of this community are on both sides of that border.
Mm.
When I compare the capacity, the wealth, the knowledge, and the numbers, both the quality and the quantity of this community in North America,
Mm.
of course, Mexico is North America too, but there aren't many Iranians in Mexico. So I mean, Canada, US,
Right.
it's incomparable
Right.
to, say, Germany, UK, France, Sweden, Holland, just no comparison,
Right.
both numerically, quantitatively,
Right.
and qualitatively, right?
Right.
And the question is, well, why don't we have such entities in this part of the world? Is it our culture? Partially, but is it also that the US and Canada have not been the optimum hosts that would enable and welcome Iranians like yourself,
Mm.
especially people like you, Shahriar,
Mm.
to lead the charge?
Mm.
And I believe there's scores of individuals, maybe not as prominent as you, but who have that capacity to play that role, who are obviously constructive, right?
Right. Right.
And and in a word, the reason is that we don't have even a handful, even 2 university settings. You're in Southern California, from what I
Right.
understand. Can you name one university setting where the current situation is being discussed in a dispassionate way, like you and I are talking about it? I can't.
No.
There's UC Irvine focused on ancient history, like what happened 2,000 years ago.
Right.
There's UCLA focused on film.
Right.
What's the difference between post-revolutionary film and pre-revolutionary film, right? Cinema.
Right.
You've got Stanford. It's talking about what's going on right now, but it's not free. It's basically regime change philosophy, right?
Right.
Just like Larry Hoover Institution, neo-Reaganite, let's go overthrow and then we'll worry about the rest later.
Right.
Just the way we brought democracy and freedom to Iraq and Syria and Libya and Afghanistan. You know, we've our mission is accomplished there. Now let's go try that same method in Iran, which I think would be disastrous, right?
Right.
So on the one hand, yes, we have some cultural issues, but I believe at the same time, we need to ask our compatriots in America and in Canada,
Right.
why doesn't the University of Toronto have a seminar where these kinds of issues can be discussed the way you and I are discussing it? Why? Is it too radical? Or what you and I are saying too radical? Is it?
Doesn't
Is
seem
it?
like it. It seems very rudimentary and basic.
Yeah, it's basic and
Yeah.
everybody knows that. Why doesn't the University of Toronto have it? Why doesn't any university in Canada have it, right?
Right.
Why doesn't any well-funded think tank in Canada have it? And similarly in the US, why doesn't UCLA have it, right? Why doesn't Columbia University, where I used to work, have it? Because I did my PhD at Rutgers. Why doesn't Rutgers have it? Why doesn't Princeton have it? None of them have it. Why?
Yeah.
Because, in my opinion, in America, companies and the government do not allow enough oxygen for people to breathe.
Right.
It's either Trumpism, where it's just like
Yeah.
that,
Right.
or it's wokeism, which is the flip side of that coin. But
Yeah.
they both shut down
Right.
debate.
It's
Wokeism doesn't
extreme.
allow you to
It's
talk.
extremism. It's
It's
almost like a
extreme.
media
It's
reaction, like you
extreme. And
say.
again, what reactionary? It's
Right.
reactionary.
Right.
And but in my opinion, uh, it's because I've organized many events in the U.S.,
Right.
including at the Obama White House, where I brought together numerous Iranian American organizations
Yeah.
to come and talk about not Iran, but
Right.
the vast contributions of this community to the United States of America,
Right.
the tens of thousands of patents that Iranian
Yeah.
Americans hold. Well,
Yeah.
who's benefiting from these patents? America is.
Right.
We are a part of that community, right?
Right.
The thousands of doctors,
Right.
thousands of professors,
Right.
right?
Right.
Thousands of people, social workers, all
Yeah.
these people, right?
Right.
And most importantly, in many ways, entrepreneurs, wealth generators, job
Right.
creators, right?
Right.
And to this day, and when I organized those events, people would tell me, well, how did you do it? I said, well, I mean, partially because I'm interested in this arena. I do have a PhD in public policy,
Sure.
but it wasn't that. It was because I wasn't afraid to call the White House
Right.
and say, why aren't you doing this? And
Right.
people say, oh, you weren't afraid to call them?
Yeah.
And I'd say,
Yeah.
why would I be afraid?
Yeah.
And these are US citizens that are saying this.
Right.
And I am, and I remain a green card applicant,
Yeah.
7 years and counting,
Yeah.
Shahriar. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying?
Yeah. Yeah.
And my experience is the US system still doesn't want, for whatever reason, to empower this community, because if it wanted to, the first thing it would do, it would create the intellectual space in a handful, then in a few dozen universities, where Iranians could sit around a table and talk
Right.
under an academic banner.
Right.
Because academic arenas are for you to get to the truth, like, or to discuss. It's a
Right.
dialogue, debate.
So
But
on
we
that,
don't have.
we don't have that here. So on that point, I just saw something. I don't know. It was some NIAC event at Chicago.
It was canceled.
It was canceled.
Nagar Mortazavi, right?
Right. And I've seen other conversations where I think some schools tried to create a forum for conversation. It wasn't as formal as your structuring, which is what I would like to see, a formal structured thing, not just some passing flash in the pants, as they say, seminar, but a structured conversation about one of the most important countries in the Middle East, if not the world, from an economic standpoint. So how do we get over our own disagreement about the path forward?
Well, again, we have disagreements, but every community has this. Don't Americans have disagreements?
Sure.
Like Trumpism,
Sure.
for example,
Sure.
right? So let's talk about University of Chicago. What happened there, right?
Right.
Now, Negar Mortazavi, right, is an articulate Iranian American woman, okay? But at the same time, she has never said or written a single word that's critical of the kleptocratic theocracy that runs Iran.
Right.
She's never done that, right?
Right.
It's her right.
Right. Sure.
You know, it's your right. I mean, it's not illegal to. However, why does the University of Chicago only bring her?
Right.
Had it been up to me, I would have said, all right, we're going to bring one person who's going to say, well, this is bad, but it could get a lot worse. And let's not meddle.
Right.
And, and for example, Khamenei was democratically elected, which she has said, not in so many words, that, basically mimicking what Jawad Zarif has been saying, that, yes, the leader, there is this assembly of experts, Majlis Khobregan, and he's democratically elected. Well, that's garbage. That's not true, right?
Right.
Okay. So you bring Negar. So again, it was reactionary. They canceled it. What could have they done? Bring Negar, bring Shahriar, bring Alidad, bring somebody else, and say, look, we're not here to beat each other up. This is the University of Chicago. We're here to have a civilized discussion. If you don't want to do that, don't come. Don't be a debater.
Right.
And we're not after character assassination either. We want to get different viewpoints to be put honestly on the table. But ironically, America doesn't seem capable of doing that anymore. You know what I'm saying? It's all about, like, let's assassinate this person's character.
Cancel culture. There's a lot of cancel culture.
Again, It's
And you know what?
Trumpism versus wokeism.
Right,
And both of them, they shut down debate instead of
right.
saying, well, let's talk about,
And you know what? As I'm watching that, as I'm observing that, I feel the more disagreements and shutting down and canceling we're doing with each
Yeah,
other, the more we're helping the regime.
yeah,
I mean, there's nothing more important if we can't identify a way to tolerate different
yeah,
points of view in our own community out here where there's
yeah,
nobody's shooting at us. Nobody, I mean, look, I used to say our brothers and sisters are in a struggle in Iran, but now it's our children. It's our children. There's a lot of gray-haired men and women out here where
yeah,
literally our children fighting and dying in the streets, something
yeah,
unprecedented in
yeah,
any kind of revolution that I've ever seen. That is just like you say, it's a women's movement, but it's the next generation movement. So now here we are, gray-haired men and women out here with all of this intellectual capital, as you just laid out, coast to coast. Imagine a day without Iranians in North America.
yeah,
This country would shut down. So, with all due respect to all the other minorities and
yeah,
expatriates, we have done, knock on wood, very, very well in these past 3 years.
yeah,
And we've contributed to North American science, math, society, culture, business in every way we can possibly do it. We've built this enormous infrastructures of companies and employers, and yet we cannot have a simple, constructive conversation amongst ourselves in a way that would benefit the future of our kids in Iran,
yeah,
not our brothers, our kids. So my gut feeling is, we need to do a little bit better here because any disagreement and outright cancel culture we're exercising here in this culture, we're only helping the regime out there, in my
yeah,
humble opinion.
exactly.
Because if I were them, I would bet we can never come to terms and get united as a culture here. And as long as we stay, we infight, they win. Period.
Well, let's deal with some of the mythology. All right, Shahriar. So first of all, are Americans united? I don't think so.
Yeah.
I think this is the most disunited I've ever seen that country. And
Sure.
I've got a half a century of deep ties to the United States.
Sure.
I have more cousins in America than I do in Iran.
Sure, sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what about the Turkish community? Are they united?
Yeah. No.
What about Arabic speaking? What about, so let's stop this, not stop, but let's demythologize this
Right.
notion that Iranians are uniquely incapable of getting together. We're not. However, Iranian Americans need to be empowered,
Right.
and they haven't been.
Right.
They haven't been because the venues don't exist for them to get together. Academic environments, and I keep getting back to the importance of universities, think tanks, civic institutions, right? The nonprofit sector.
Right.
These are critically important. They're more important than some .com executive making an app and making 100 million and sailing into the sunset.
Right.
That's not the issue now.
Right.
The problem solvers are the civic people now,
Right.
right?
Right.
So these civic-minded Iranian Americans have not been empowered by the American system writ large,
Right.
for a variety of reasons, and we could get into that if you want, but that's the fact.
Right.
And what should we do? We should go and talk to these institutions. Well, UC Irvine, are you not allowed to
Right.
host a session where somebody like you,
Yeah.
Shahriar,
Yeah.
could manage or convene a group of people to get into these issues in depth and exchange views in a civil, respectful fashion? What about you, UCLA? What about you, UCSD? What
Right.
about you, Rand Corporation? What about you, Brookings? What about you, American Enterprise Institute? What about the Woodrow Wilson Center? What about the Center for, not a single, because I wrote my dissertation on think tanks, all right?
Right.
Of course, it's the progressive
You know how they work.
history.
Right.
It's the progressive era history that I dissected, which goes about 100 years ago. Where do they come from? But I keep pretty close tabs on what's going on among them. Not a single one of them, right?
Right.
And
Right.
somebody like me wants to create that. They say there's no funding, right?
Right.
So,
Right.
so in a wealthy country like Canada and the US, when they say, and by they I mean the establishment, I
Right.
mean government, corporations, and institutions like UC Berkeley, like Stanford, that's an institution, right?
Right.
Whenever they say we don't have funding, that's a euphemism for we don't want to do it,
Right.
right?
Right.
So somebody like me has to go, I want to bring the Iranian American community together to celebrate Nowruz properly in
Right.
Washington. I succeeded, but I had to go person to person. Do you have $1,000 for me?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
do you have $500? I mean,
Yeah.
for Christ's sake.
Yeah.
And then they blow all this money on all these programs that just perpetuate the status quo, right? And then
Right.
call it free speech. We have free speech. I don't believe we have free speech. We have Trumpism and we have wokeism,
Yeah.
both of which are against free speech. They shut down free speech and
Right.
free thought, right?
Right.
And so what should we do? We should get together and lean on these institutions, because once that session is being held on the campus of UC Berkeley,
Right.
then it's and it's open.
Right.
It's being broadcast to people in Iran itself. And I'm thinking now, Shahriar, somebody might say, well, that's us thousands of miles away.
Right.
How will that affect Iran? I'll say, first of all, with postmodern telecommunications, it's as though it's happening in Iran, especially if it's held in Farsi, right?
Right. Right.
But secondly, it's the Bannister effect. Roger Bannister ran a 4-minute mile in 1954 in Oxford, England.
Right.
And after him, people started saying, you know what? It's doable,
possible.
because before that, we thought it's not doable, right?
Right.
And then in the following decade, a dozen people ran it.
Right.
And beat his record. So if Iranians in Iran can see us capable, right,
Right.
in the Persian language,
Right.
in an articulate and substantive fashion, discussing what a post-Islamist or post-clerical
Right.
Iran might look like, they say, my God, these guys have the organization and they're talking about it
Yeah.
and they're writing about it,
Yeah.
but we're not doing it.
No.
And it's not because we don't have the brains, it's because the environment doesn't enable us.
And I think just to point out to our audience and in my experience, Iranians have always been a people of deep faith and iman, right? So I think what you're observing, and even our American or foreign friends that are looking at what's going on, they think Iranians are against religion or faith, and that's not the case.
That's not true either.
I think fundamentally, as Persians, we've always preferred a secular government, but we've never quite had that freedom of speech. Like you said, the Shah became too much of a dictator, and it became kind of trying to extract religion and forcing women into one way of being. And of course, when the revolution happened, another way of thinking kind of ensued. And I think you very well put it that we're not necessarily one or the other. So as far as unity issue is concerned, unity or a lack of unity isn't unique to us. Persians. We criticize ourselves, as I did, but other communities are just as having a difficulty with unity. Americans, perfect example right here next door to us. Americans, no different, especially in this past few years. So based on that foundation that you put it, I think when you ask what can we do as expatriates in North America, getting together with universities and being empowered, and facilitating constructive conversations in a systematic way instead of some reactionary way. One thing we can do, which is one of my key questions for you, what can we do as expatriates that will be meaningful to our people? And that is definitely one constructive way. Let me take it a step further, because I see a lot of chatter online when they say, be our voice. So we're talking about being our voice. But what can the U.S. government realistically do in other than making speeches and sanctioning, any of these people? I don't know. As far as I'm concerned, sanctions, when somebody's got billions of dollars under their mattress in Iran, I don't know how sanctions really make a difference in that regime's life. In my mind, sanctions of always hurt the ordinary Iranian who don't have any ability to hide their money or do, you know, because the regime can find 1,000 different ways to hide money and steal money and circumvent the law, whereas ordinary Iranians have no options. They just get hit with a ton of bricks. But putting that aside, what do you think the American government can realistically do over the next few months?
The American government can do a lot.
Mm.
And first of all, there needs to be legitimate, transparent ways of sending funds to Iran.
Right.
So if you are in Canada, if you're in Toronto, as I am,
Right.
there are dozens of money exchange places, Sarafi,
Right.
through whom you could pay this guy dollars and get your cousin or grandma or friend to get that money in reals there. So if you send somebody $200 a month,
Right.
that's huge for them there right now, okay?
Right.
So that's one thing they can do, right? That there are certain financial institutions that can facilitate the transfer of funds from the United States to Iran, and they're monitored.
Mm.
So we know it's not going to the coffers of people who are going to siphon it off, steal
To
it, whatever.
individuals, to families, to
Individuals, yeah.
Right.
Yeah. That's number one.
Right.
Number two, establish university to university linkages. I tried to be involved in some of that in the Obama years, but I don't think we had the setup for it, even though we did some translation work. Establish linkages and have cadres, networks of people who are very good at translation, right?
Right.
So that a high-level dialogue can take place that's open, right? Americans, sadly, have developed a major problem with free speech.
Right.
And free thinking,
Right.
right? It's all whose side are you on? Which bunker do you belong to, right? As opposed to what is the problem we're trying to solve here, right?
Right.
So, for example, Reza Pahlavi, in my opinion, significant player in the book Iran and its Place Among Nations, of which I'm the principal author, came out in 2008. I outlined the major contributions of this man's father and grandfather, and I outlined some of their problems, some of the things they did wrong, right? But nonetheless, those 52 years were probably the best 52 years Iranians have seen in the past 500 or ever, right? Qajar era was very bad. Prior to that, it was pre-modern in many ways. So how could you compare, right? So his name is not a dirty name. His dad and his granddad did a lot for that country. And more importantly, the people who were educated under that. Part of the reason Iranians in America do so well is the Pahlavi era.
Right.
Because during that period, more Iranians came to America than Chinese and Indian combined.
Wow.
During that quarter century after 1953, right? Wow. That's why we're so integrated, if you like. That's why we do so well in America, is because we're not new to it. We've been exposed to it a long time, right?
Right.
What could America do? Enable venues. What could the U.S. government do? And you may say, well, universities in the U.S. aren't the government. Well, they're connected to the government, right? And I'm going to get to Reza Pahlavi in a moment. So he came and gave this most important speech of his life yesterday, covered on VOA. I don't know if you saw it.
I saw it. Yeah.
He's been talking a long time. This is the most important, because in politics, in real estate, it's location. In politics, it's timing.
Sure.
It's the timing of it, right? What's happening. And he kept talking about our group. We have multiple working groups called Guruh be Farsi migim, right? But that's shrouded in mystery. Who are members of this working group? Who's funding you?
Yeah.
Like, you know, who set up this event here, right? Because this man has never mentioned the name of a single individual in any of his speeches. Like, thank you, Ali. Thank you, Shariar. Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Jennifer. Never. It's as though this event just got organized by itself. That somehow just, right? And so people are thinking, well, is there something going on behind the scenes here that you're not telling us? You're saying we've got all these working groups. Well, who are their members?
Right.
That's what the U.S. government can do. Be transparent. Say it's this man, right? And 15 people who don't see him as the king and say, well, whatever you do is the right thing, sir.
Right.
That's not patriotism. In an American context, it isn't patriotism. If I, and again, I stress, as a green card applicant,
Right.
if I said anything America does is the right thing,
Right.
then I'm lying. Like,
Right.
and people know I'm lying.
Right.
Not everything that America does is the right thing. Only, I mean, even God. I mean, unless you're
Right.
God, right? If you
Right.
believe in God,
Right.
you're not. Nobody's infallible,
Right.
right? So already they're setting up somebody, because this man lives in Rockville, Maryland, Potomac, Maryland, right? He has never had a single session with the Iranian American community.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, there's 1.5 million Iranians in America. And this gentleman, what does he think? He's beyond everybody in America?
Yeah.
No, like
Yeah.
Iranian, right?
Yeah.
So what can the US government do?
Right.
Be transparent.
Right.
Whereas or somebody could say, well, Reza Pahlavi has no ties to the US government, which you'd have to be naive to believe that, right?
Yeah.
That, well, there's just nothing. He's just by himself, No, that's not true.
Right.
And this man has got the only name in Iran that's known by 50 million people.
Yeah.
You say Pahlavi, they know it. And those of us who are old enough to remember those days, because my dad was the brigadier commander of the military academy under the Shah.
Yeah.
So I have a bit of an insider's view of how that system worked. You know what I'm saying? What I'm saying is the US government can do things on the financial front in terms of sanctions.
Yeah.
It can be transparent.
Yeah.
It can enable the establishment of leadership of not stooges and lackeys and front organizations, but rather organic, legitimate entities that are led by individuals like some of us, you with your trade organization going back a quarter of a century.
Yeah.
I remember the brilliant work you did, me, and there's dozens of people like us.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But we're not anybody's stooge.
Right.
And it's obvious that we're not.
Yeah. Having no political agenda is a
No, we do have a political agenda, Shahriar.
No, we don't.
We do a political agenda. We don't want that country to unravel.
Right.
We don't want it to come out of this mess and get into a worse mess. That is a political agenda.
Yeah. I mean political as in, like, whether it's this guy or that guy, we're not trying to sell anything to anyone. I think you mentioned, again, very rightly so, our number one, and people like us, and I think there's many people like us.
Many people.
We fundamentally want what's best for the Iranian people.
Yeah.
And to me, a lot of that has to do with self-determination, independence, free and fair elections. And I heard somewhere that these people rioting, our children rioting and dying in the streets have no representative government whatsoever. Yeah. So that disconnect needs to change. However which way success looks like you say, whether it's legislative change, regime change, new constitution, I see all kinds of anger on those streets and in the streets of Toronto and San Diego, Washington, from expatriates. And to the extent that we can shepherd our community into a constructive conversation, do what's best for the Iranian Americans and really the next generation. A lot of these anger that I see in this community, I just wanted to comment on this before we have to leave. I just feel like anger and reaction, as you put it, is not helpful to our children dying on the streets of Iran. We have to put our differences aside, tolerate different points of view, and build bridges and structures and institutions, as you've said, that help Iran thrive and really, in my mind, unleash the power of our women, of our children, of our next generation to just make Iran, I'm just going to say, one of the greatest countries, not only in the Middle East, but on the planet. We historically, obviously, Persians have had that impact on the world. First Bill of Rights, Cyrus, all of those things are ingrained in our culture. So when we talk about Iran, in my mind, we're not talking about some real estate or some flag or some ideology. We're talking about the hope,
the civilization
that we're leaving behind. None of us are going to live forever. So when we say we want to leave Iran in a better place, that means we want to create the structures and institutions and civilization that we have all benefited from for thousands of years, despite the past difficulties of the past 50, 40 years. Have always been, to our core, very proud to be Iranian,
Yeah.
wherever we are in the world. So now we are at this horizon level, this threshold level, where we want to find ways to help the next generation. It may not change our lives here, but I dare say the recent events of the past month has been so devastating, emotionally painful to us as Iranian expatriates. On top, whatever our kids are experiencing on the streets is 1,000 times worse. But for us expatriates watching here and wanting to be a part of a constructive conversation, I really can't think of just a horrendous experience watching those painful videos and seeing how our compatriots are suffering. There's nothing could be worse. So I just wanted to echo everything you've said. I wanted to encourage and channel our community into constructive conversation, into tolerating opposing points of view, into engaging with institutions and finding ways of empowerment, as you put it, with universities and with institutions, so we can build those bridges and find a path forward for that next generation, for all the reasons we hold dear. That Iran is a beautiful country. The people are just an amazing people. They deserve better than what they're getting, and we owe it to them to find a way constructively to help them move forward. So any last words, Alidad, before we have to sign off?
I hope you and I can do some work together, because I think we're completely on the same page.
Thank you, my friend. We will. I will find more of our expatriates willing to shepherd a constructive conversation. I will definitely talk to you more about university.
And when I'm in Southern Cal, I'm going to look you up.
You will. Thank you so much, my friend. Stay in touch. And once the clip is up, I'll send you a link.
Take care, buddy.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.